Good morning, friends. My name is J.C. Fowler. I am the director of Crossroads Youth and Young Adult Ministry here at APC. And this morning we're continuing our series, But I Thought, the messy meeting of faith and life. We're asking questions like, how are we to think? What are we to do? Where is God when our understanding of God and the world come in friction with our lived experience? But first, I have a little confession for you guys. Now, this may come as a surprise, but I have quite an addictive personality. I know, shocking. And I must confess that over the last year, I have overindulged. I have gone a little too far. I've probably lost control when it comes to taking personality assessments and inventories. Guilty, it's true. The Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, the 5Q Spiritual Gifts Assessment, Clifton Strength Finders, the Big Five, Working Genius DISC, and the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality Inventory, I think I've taken them all. You might say I have a little problem. But what I discovered in that hobby is that across the board, I am a statement A kind of person. Here's what I mean. When you take those assessments and inventories, they often give you two statements, and they say, which one do you agree with more? Statement A, you decide what will happen to you. Life is largely in your control. Statement B, if something is meant to happen, it will. There is little you can do to change it. Psychologists call this an internal versus an external locus of control. People like myself with an internal locus of control believe to a greater degree that they are responsible for their own outcomes, while people with an external locus of control believe to a greater degree that it is external forces that are responsible for their outcomes. Now, one is not better or worse, it's just different accents we place, different worldviews that we hold. But even so, there is a large chance that the majority of you in this room here this morning are statement A types of people. I say that because in the United States, there is a larger population of statement A people found than in any other country of the world. And that's particularly true of the Northeast. Now, in reality, our world, and the Bible attests to our faith, is really a cosmic tug-of-war between the two. And so, while one of us really leans into that statement A sort of thinking, I think all of us, to some degree, want to believe that we can assert some control over our lives. To say it another way, we all believe to a degree that life should be fair and predictable. We might even say formulaic, and our faith is no different. Here's what I mean. We all want to believe this formula. If I blank, then blank. A couple quick examples. If I work hard, then I will be successful. If I live an honest life, then people will trust me. If I go to church on Sundays, then my faith will grow. These aren't wild assumptions to make. And I got to tell you, I really like this sort of simple, controllable, input-output way of the world. Maybe you do too. And perhaps that's why the book of Proverbs is one of my favorite books in the Bible. Proverbs is essentially a collection of wisdom sayings that we find in the Old Testament portions of our Bibles. They're writings that are largely attributed to King Solomon, one of the great kings of the people of Israel, the people who are chronicled throughout the Old Testament. And they say that he was among the wisest people in the ancient world. Proverbs is essentially a guide for living well in God's good world. And it often follows that formula. If you blank, then blank. So today we want to look at just one of those wisdom sayings in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Here's what it says. Train children in the right way, and when old, they will not stray. If I train children in the right way, then when old, they will not stray. They will not wander away. This is a proverb for parents, teachers, shepherds, really anyone that cares for young people or that might in the future. And if we take a look at the first two words of this verse, we're given a deeper insight into what the author may have been trying to convey. So the connotation for the Hebrew word train here, Hebrew being the original language that the text was written in, suggests a dedication from the beginning. So what that means in this context is that it's speaking of faith training, of faith formation, that we would do well to start that training and formation from the very beginning of a child's life. While commenting on this passage, one of the greatest theologians of the Middle Ages, St. Bede, said this: "Because people much more commonly follow the habits with which they were imbued as children, be zealous for virtue in youth." To say it's easier to start them on the right way than it is to get them off the wrong way later. Now, the Hebrew word used here for children is a singular definite construction. What that means is that it could just as well be translated this way: train the child in the right way, and when old, they will not stray. You see, the child means not some general or generic person, but a particular and unique one. It means that for the young people entrusted to our care, we should consider their uniqueness when we train them up in the right way, in the way of life, in the way of Jesus. I think this applies to temperaments and dispositions, but just as well to unique contexts. In a few weeks at Adult Ed, I'll be leading a class diving into some more of the unique context of today's teens and young adults, some of the shared characteristics and ways that God is at work in the next generation, or Gen Z. Now, as someone who's been in youth ministry for 9 years and full-time youth ministry for 7 years, I'll tell you that Gen Z has the incredible capacity and potential to make a real difference in the world, and the world that they've inherited is much different than the one that you and even I left behind when we were their age. So shout out to all of our teenagers and younger 20-somethings that are here today. We see you, we're with you, we're for you. But I think it's really the particular and unique situations that bring the most challenge. Over the last 7-9 years, I've heard parents agonize over this one question, the question being, do I make my child go to church? More specifically, my teenager or young adult. If I make them go, will they resent me for it? If I make them go, will they resent God for it? If I don't make them go, will they ever have a faith of their own? How do I know how my child will respond, and to what approach or reasoning? Maybe I should make them go until they're old enough to stay home alone. Maybe I should make them go as long as they live under my roof. I've heard some people say that 16, that's the age where they should be able to decide whether or not they want to go. Now, God willing, if I have children one day, I'm not so sure they're going to have a choice. But I don't know. Really, really complicated stuff. We have a small group that meets every 3 to 4 weeks that we call Purposeful Parenting. It's led by Dan Dominich, and it's a small group for parents of preteens, teens, and young adults to sift through some of those complicated questions, to walk their parenting journeys together. Next meeting, January 21st, upstairs at Crossroads. You're welcome to attend. But this proverb is addressed to a culture where community was central. And so that Purposeful Parenting group just tries to get at that we answer these complicated questions in community. Now, there are certainly some general rules to be laid down, to be discerned as we see in the scriptures, and those are things worthy of exploring. But today, I'll just say, we can say with confidence, thanks additionally to the Fuller Youth Institute, that the faith life of parents, Not just coming to church on Sunday, not just their beliefs, but their characteristics, their attitudes, their practices. The faith life of parents is the number one indicator for the faith life of a young person. Now, FYI also uncovered that youth, next slide please, flourish most in faith when they have at least 5 adults who know them and care for them in their faith community. So, things like Sunday school and youth group are vital, but they are only variables in that formula that we've been talking about, and not even the most significant. The National Study of Youth and Religion says it this way: we get what we are when it comes to our children's faith. And so, as people who care for youth, especially parents, it'll be your example that will be the greatest impact in passing on the way of Jesus to the next generation. You may have heard it before, but it's worth saying it again. We can't make our children believe, but we can make them believe that we believe. And we do that most through our actions. All right, good news, especially for my statement A type of people. Let us just live out Proverbs 22:6, and all will be well. Train children in the right way, and when old, they will not stray, they will not wander away. Simple, controllable, input, output, and they all lived happily ever after. Fuller Youth Institute shared some other statistics. Roughly 40 to 50% of students who grew up in the church walk away from the church after they graduate high school. And if you've been around the church long enough, or if your kids are of that age, you probably don't need me to tell you that. I'll tell you, over 7 years full-time youth ministry, I've seen it with my own eyes. And so maybe you find yourself wondering, with that simple, controllable input-output formula, thinking to yourself, but I thought if I raised my kids in the church, then they would thrive in faith. Then they would make good decisions. Then we would have a strong relationship. But they aren't. And they didn't. And you don't. They've gone astray. They've wandered away. But I thought if I loved those kids in youth group well, if I invested my time there, I thought if I taught those kids in Sunday school well, if I prayed for those students, then they would know God's peace and purpose. Then they would develop a faith of their own. Then they would overcome that depression, that anxiety, and those struggles. And they don't. And they haven't. And it seems hopeless that they will. They've gone astray. They've wandered away. Sure, yes, parents are responsible to raise their own unique children in the faith. Yes, to learn how to do that well, to cultivate their own life with God, to be intentional about those things. Sure, shepherds and Sunday school teachers are responsible to be faithful, to listen and to teach well, to pray for those students. Yes, those things are true. But we also know that God has always used imperfect parents and imperfect people to help the next generation thrive. And so hear me when I say this, this isn't merely a do better sermon. I know incredibly wise and faithful parents whose children are struggling, hurting, who have gone astray, who have wandered away from the faith and family. I know tons of children and youth who have come up through these awesome programs in this church and churches like it and have strayed away, have wandered away from their faith and their family. And so if that fits the description of your kid or a kid that you love, and at some point during this message you began to tune me out so you could beat yourself up with the list of regrets you have for not loving the kids entrusted to your care perfectly, please come back for a moment. Put down the bat. Pick up a feather. God's grace abounds. And there's some good news to be heard, and I think that this next idea is especially for you. The truth is, as much as we want them to be, there are things in this world, even the things that we care most about, that are in a significant way still out of our control. So, what do we do when the young people we love? You know what? Let's go even wider than that. What do we do when any of the people we love, the friend we grew up with, our sibling, our in-law, our parent, what do we do when the people we love wander away from God and into the vices of the world? What do we do when the people we love wander into storms of anxiety and pits of depression too powerful and too deep for us to pull them out from? When conversations turn to one-word answers or utter silence, when they move away and no longer care to call, when the addiction seems to be winning, what do we do when it feels like the people we love are lost to us and lost to God? And yeah, when those things are happening, where is God? But I thought if I thought if I raised them in the church, they'd be okay. I thought if I prayed for them, they'd overcome those struggles. But I thought, the book of Proverbs is still one of my favorite books of the Bible. But we must recognize that it is a book of principles. Principles that we would do well to live by and pay attention to, but principles that must not be mistaken for promises. You see, the Christian life lived out is a life lived of principles. But it is firstly a life lived on the promises of the principle of the world. And his name is Jesus. And so what do we do when we find ourselves in that, but I thought, desperation and confusion? Well, brothers and sisters, we go to him. Hear these words from Jesus, Matthew chapter 18, verses 10 to 14. Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you, in heaven their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them wanders, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that did not wander off. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost. Jesus is talking about children, but not just children in age, but children in faith, children of God. Some people have suggested passages similar to this one argue in favor of the existence of guardian angels. I'm not so sure about that. We could explore that more, but what the angel remark definitely reveals is the importance of the little ones in the eyes of God. That they will see the face of God in heaven. And you can go back one slide, back to the text. You might have noticed that there's a missing verse 11. It's bracketed. And that's because it's a verse that's not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts of the Gospel of Matthew, and so for that reason it is omitted. But I know some of you guys, and that might drive you mad if I don't address it. So, what the verse would have read is, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." And it is those words of Jesus that we find in Luke chapter 19, verse 10. And speaking of Luke, in his gospel, we have another version of this sheep parable. And if you've heard the parable of the wandering sheep, or as Luke calls it, the lost sheep before, it's likely from his gospel that you've seen it. But you see, when it comes to our own children and loved ones, it is the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew that we ought to pay attention to, that speak to us most directly. For you see, in Luke's account, Jesus is talking to tax collectors and sinners. In context, these are people who were believed to be outside the family of God. But in Matthew's account, he's talking to the disciples, to the very family of God. So in church speak, Luke's account, we might say, is evangelistic. It's about drawing new people into the family and into the faith. But Matthew's account is pastoral. It demonstrates how God cares for his own children. It's God's declaration, your children, they belong to me, the Good Shepherd. And so first of all, friends, I think we need to stop thinking of people who have left the church or loved ones who have wandered away as people that we simply need to call back into the church, but rather as people that we are called to go and love right where they are. You know, this world is not an if they wander world, it's a when they wander one. We all wander. But we can rest knowing that our Heavenly Father never rests when one of his little ones have wandered away. That is, they can leave the faith and the family and even their friends, but their Heavenly Father, he never leaves them. Remember verse 14. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost. You know, in my own wandering away from God, I discovered through some acquaintances that wandering is actually something you can be charged with criminally. It's a criminal charge. Wandering, here's what it is. It's meandering around a public space with no purpose or intention under the idea that there's ill intent there. And I say that because I think that's sort of the lens that we all view wandering through. That wandering is bad and maybe even condemning. Yet if we open up the scriptures and we look carefully, we see that our God uses wandering on more than one occasion to shape his people and to form their faith. And so I'm not saying that we celebrate when those we love wander or when we ourselves wander, but simply that we remember that God doesn't waste the wandering. I'll bet that God used your own wandering to shape you. I know he did for me, and I believe that he can and he will for the ones that we love who've wandered. But I also wonder if God might use the wandering of the one you love to draw you near to him. That is, to strengthen that relationship when we're left with no choice but to rest on the promise that God actually loves our loved ones more than we love them. To be stretched to entrust to God those things, those people that we care most about in this world. When the people we love wander, it's really hard. When I was early on in the recovery community, there were tons and tons of guys that wandered away, friends I made that were gone in a week or in a month. And so I came to one of my spiritual advisors. I felt so out of control. I felt so hopeless. And she taught me this prayer practice. And so I just want to lead you through it briefly. I want to invite you all to close your eyes. I want you to picture in your mind's eye the one that you love that has wandered away. And now I want you to picture placing them in the hands of God. The open hands of God, the strong, capable, freeing hands of God. See that he loves them more than even you love them. Trust him with the ones who've wandered. You may open your eyes. We can train children in the right way, and we should. We should do that. We should train children in the faith. And still, in some way, they will go astray. They will wander. We can be faithful, and the people we love will still go astray. They will still wander. And so I want to tell you that 70% of those graduates that walk away from their faith eventually come back. I want to tell you that those questions that young adult is asking, the ways that they're criticizing their faith, is actually a critical mechanic for their own faith formation. I want to tell you that in God's good world, it's never too hard and it's never too late for the ones who've wandered away. I want to tell you that God doesn't waste the wandering, that he knows how difficult it could be. With Tolkien, I want to tell you that not all who wander are lost. For what do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them wanders, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that wandered off? I want to tell you all those things. But most of all, I want to tell you that when they wander, that those lyrics that we sung earlier, heaven joins in with a glorious sound, and the great cloud of witnesses all gather round, because the ones that were lost are finally found. I want to tell you that we can sing those lyrics with confidence because they come from a God who keeps his promises. For it is not the will of your heavenly Father that one of these little ones should be lost.